Wow, stories.
Am I the idiot for moving my depressed husband back to Canada and ruining his life? My husband Jeff and I have been married for 12 years. Jeff has depression. He has struggled with this since he was a teenager, and I knew it was an issue when we started dating. However, he seemed to be managing it fairly well at the time, without treatment, and he always perked up when we were together. So I just thought he had gloomy days sometimes. Here's some background on why he is currently so miserable. Our relationship almost ended when we had been dating for 6 months after we discovered that we had different feelings on kids. I likely wanted children when Jeff did not. In hindsight, it probably would have been better if we went separate ways at the time, but I loved him dearly. We stayed together because I thought Jeff was reconsidering his stance on kids, while he thought I was reconsidering mine. After we married, we moved to France for work and further training. We were happy those first few years in France. Life was good, but I had always viewed our time there as temporary. We went over with the intention to complete some further training, and I always thought we would return to Canada. At some point, this changed for Jeff. He started a different job while in France that he absolutely loved, and that had the potential to be a long-term position. He started to foresee our future in France as a permanent arrangement. I didn't realize this at the time. After a few years in France, my biological clock started ticking and I wanted to start a family. Jeff had reservations, but I thought it was just cold feet. We talked about this for a year before we started trying, and we agreed that we would just have one kid. I was convinced that he would love fatherhood once he had the chance because he was good with his nephew. Things went sideways when we found out we were having twins. After they were born, Jeff's depression got worse. Many days he can't function because he is so annoyed by the children. The first few years with the twins in France were the most difficult time in my life. I was incredibly sleep deprived and sick all the time, pneumonia, strep throat, and countless other illnesses. I started to long to be closer to family who could help us out. My dream job opened up in our home city next to both sets of grandparents, and I jumped at the chance to apply. I thought it was a good opportunity for Jeff too, because this city has a government facility that he always wanted to work at. At least he talked earlier in our relationship about working there. I thought it was exactly what we wanted. A chance to move back to Canada to be closer to family, to help with the twins, and a chance for both of us to get dream jobs. If we had stayed in France, I would not have had a permanent position. We also would not have been able to afford to buy a house, and we would have had to stay in our small apartment. From my perspective, there were a lot of advantages to moving to Canada, but Jeff didn't see it that way. When I got the job in our home city, we left France. We bought a house close to both sets of grandparents, which has helped so much with children. The housing market was very competitive, and we bid on many houses before we were successful. I like our house, but it is not Jeff's dream house. It was difficult because it felt like we didn't have a lot of options. But Jeff continues to be unhappy about this too. Shortly after we moved here, he got an excellent job at the government facility that he used to talk about. Except he hates this job. It has become more of a managerial position, and he is not using the skills that he was trained in. He also has trouble getting along with his boss. In short, these factors have made Jeff miserable. Job he hates, house he hates. Children he never wanted, all in a country he doesn't want to live in. If he could have his way, it would be to go back to France forever, childless, and continue to do the job that he enjoyed there. He feels I ruined his life, and he reminds me of this regularly. I have offered to divorce him and set him free to return to France, but he always says that he wants to stay with me. He just wishes it was back to the happy years in our early marriage. I have offered to sell our house and build his dream house. I have also offered to help him find a job he loves in the city. But my suggestions are always rejected. I realize now that his depression is preventing him from improving the situation. He is wallowing in his misery and can't see a way to get out of it. I know he needs antidepressants and therapy, but he won't seek help. I feel horrible about the whole situation, and I have become depressed myself. I'm sure I am the AH for not listening better to what he wanted in life. But this post is not about our marriage troubles, as there is a bigger problem. However, you need to recognize the depths of Jeff's depression, unhappiness, and anger to understand the next part. Jeff is currently sick. His symptoms have been getting worse for months. I strongly suspect that it is cancer that started in the lymph nodes in his neck and has possibly spread to his lungs. He is not willing to go to a doctor because he is extremely unhappy and depressed, and he has nothing to live for. I have begged him to see a doctor, but each time he reminds me that this is the path he wants, unalived by critical illness. He repeats that I have gotten everything I want at the expense of his happiness, and that the one thing he wants now is to die on his terms. I have done everything I can think of to change his mind. Be a better wife if I can. Try to get him into therapy to get his depression treated, because then maybe he would get his cancer treated. But nothing helps. I have not told anyone, family or friends, about the depths of our problems or Jeff's health. I could use some advice. Is there anything I can do to make this situation better? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Jeff is a grown man who can make his own decisions. You are a grown woman who can make her own decisions. You can either decide to communicate with your husband in a straightforward way and let him live his life making the decisions he wants to make, or you can continue being codependent and randomly guessing at what it is he apparently likes or dislikes. Comment 2. Maybe he doesn't have cancer, but something curable and he won't die. He will just live with symptoms for years. LOL. He seems to think this is his way out, but it might not be. It's better to get the diagnosis and let yourself die than to assume death is a year away when it's actually not. Now for the update. Thanks for reading my last post. Over the past month, things have taken a turn for the worse, and I'm at my wit's end. Jeff's health has continued to decline rapidly. He's lost a significant amount of weight, and his energy levels are almost non-existent. He spends most of his days in bed, barely eating or drinking. I've tried everything to get him to see a doctor, but he remains adamant about not seeking medical help. His refusal is not just stubbornness. It's a manifestation of his deep depression and desire to end his life on his own terms. This has put an enormous strain on me, both emotionally and physically. I'm constantly worried about him, and it's affecting my ability to function at work and take care of the twins. One particularly difficult day, I found Jeff in the bathroom, struggling to breathe. His face was pale, and he looked like he was in immense pain. I panicked and called an ambulance, despite his protests. When the paramedics arrived, Jeff was furious with me. He kept saying that I was taking away his last bit of control over his life. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed my worst fears. Jeff has advanced stage cancer. They wanted to start treatment immediately, but Jeff refused. He signed himself out of the hospital against medical advice and came home, more despondent than ever. The fallout from this incident has been severe. Jeff barely speaks to me now, and when he does, it's filled with resentment. He accuses me of betraying him and not respecting his wishes. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells around him, trying to avoid triggering another outburst. The twins have started to notice the tension, and they're acting out more than usual. I'm trying to shield them from the worst of it, but it's becoming increasingly difficult. In the midst of all this, I've had to take on more responsibilities at work. My boss has been understanding to a point, but there's only so much leeway they can give me. I'm constantly exhausted, juggling work, the kids, and Jeff's deteriorating condition. I've reached out to a few close friends for support, but I haven't told them the full extent of what's going on. I'm afraid of how they'll react and what they'll think of Jeff and me. One evening, while I was putting the twins to bed, Jeff had a particularly bad episode. He was in so much pain that he couldn't even get out of bed. I sat with him holding his hand, and he finally opened up a bit. He told me about his childhood, how his father had been a strict, unloving man who never showed any affection. Jeff's mother had been the opposite, warm and caring, but she died when he was young. He said that he's always felt like he's been living in his father's shadow, never good enough, never able to find happiness. This was a side of Jeff I had never seen before, and it broke my heart to hear him talk about his past with such sadness. But before I could process this new information, Jeff's condition took another turn for the worse. He started coughing up blood, and I had no choice but to call an ambulance again. This time, the doctor said that without immediate treatment, Jeff wouldn't have much time left. They managed to stabilize him, but he's still refusing any long-term treatment. He's back home now, and I'm trying to make him as comfortable as possible, but It feels like I'm just waiting for the inevitable. In the midst of all this chaos, I've had to confront some harsh truths about myself. I've realized that I've been so focused on what I thought was best for our family that I didn't really listen to what Jeff wanted. I pushed him into a life he never wanted, and now we're both paying the price. I've been trying to make amends, but it feels like it's too little, too late. I've also had to face the reality that I can't do this alone. I've started looking into hospice care for Jeff, hoping that they can provide some relief for both of us. It's a difficult decision, but I know it's the right one. I've also reached out to a therapist for myself, trying to find a way to cope with everything that's happening. It's a small step, but it's something. As for the future, I don't know what it holds. Jeff's condition is worsening by the day, and I'm bracing myself for the worst. I'm trying to stay strong for the twins, but it's hard when I feel like I'm falling apart inside. I've started to think about what life will be like without Jeff, and it's a terrifying thought. But I know I have to keep going for the sake of our children, if nothing else.